Thank you for joining today's episode of QA Bytes. Today we have another installment discussing common test automation issues. Today is data management. As I'm sure anyone that's been involved in any automation at all can agree that data-related issues are near the top of the list of things that can cause implementations to go south. First, the more you can do to execute automation in an isolated and stable environment against known data, the better off you are. Of course, this is much easier said than done with the complexity of today's systems. The reality is that you're going to face data issues, and there's some techniques that you can use when designing your framework to minimize these. One common issue that plagues automation and testing in general is dynamic data. This is data that you use in your test cases that changes over time. This might be a set of login credentials that a bunch of your test cases use, account numbers, policy numbers, etc. If this data exists in dozens or hundreds of test cases, it becomes a real burden when they have to be changed. The way we've addressed this is to implement a concept we call metadata tags. This allows us to replace test case data that is likely to change with static metadata tags. The metadata tags are mapped within a central repository to the current data values. Then the framework replaces the tags with the appropriate data at runtime. When the data does change, the central repository is updated with the new value, avoiding the need to update every test case where the data is used. Dates and the need to generate data for development and testing activities is another common issue facing automation. Date-dependent functionality rarely allows you the luxury to utilize a static date in your test cases. Typically, you must use a date that is relative to the current date. In addition, efficiently creating large amounts of data for testing or other development activities is a great way to get benefit from automation. However, that benefit is reduced if you have to manually create large sets of data that your framework will ingest in order to create the required output. We've addressed both issues using a concept we call data keywords. Instead of using static data in your test cases, we specify keywords that return specific classes or types of data, but randomized to the extent we need. In this case, these keywords will give a random first and last name, a date of birth for someone between 35 and 45 years old, and an email address for the domain mailinator.com. So to use the example here, if I needed to create 1,000 records, instead of entering 1,000 rows of data, we can run the framework for 1,000 iterations, and each iteration, these keywords will return a new value. Finally, from a data perspective, we have system-generated data. This is where the system you're testing generates data that needs to be used in downstream testing activities. In this case, an order number from an e-commerce site. To address this need, we've implemented a concept we call execution context. The execution context is essentially a storage area that allows us to persist values. The values can be retrieved by subsequent test steps during the same execution or even in separate executions at a later date. Thank you for joining today's episode of QA Bytes. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to contact me via email or social media. For Utopia Solutions, I'm Lee Barnes.